I was running through the race, and I remember just hearing my name several times and seeing familiar faces. And then also people that I've never met before. They're cheering for me like they've known me my entire life, and had, and were so invested in it as well. And, I'm running, and, there's one, this intrinsic motivation, but then you're running and you see all these crowds cheering, and I'm so appreciative of all the time they're taking, right? It's 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday, and they're out there cheering for me, and it gives me so much motivation. And you find this extra win, this extra gear when you're running by.
Welcome to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. If you are new to this program, please check out americashealthiestcity.com to learn about our 10-year community partnership to make all of Richmond the healthiest in America by 2033. There's an ideas board where you can see others' ideas, you can leave your own ideas, you can comment on ideas that have been left there, and you can learn what it takes to become an ambassador if you represent a for-profit organization, a nonprofit organization, an academic institution, or a governmental agency. We need all of you to join this cause if we're going to see this mission through, and you can learn all about it at americashealthiestcity.com. Today, we are recording this episode from Common House, and I have Rob Mazzanti, the first place finisher in the Richmond Marathon. Last week, we interviewed John Lugbill, the director of Sports Backers, who's responsible for that race, and so we're excited to have this interview. Hopefully, I know it's not your first interview, but hopefully it's your first radio interview. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and if you wouldn't mind, start with how'd you get to Richmond, I guess is the question we start everybody with.
Sure, thanks, Will. I'm really glad to be here. I'm excited, yeah. So how I got to Richmond, so I actually moved to Richmond, this is way back when, so we're running the clock a little bit. When I came for undergrad, I went to the University of Richmond. In 2000, started here in 2006, graduated in 2009, and then stayed in Richmond for several years working, and was mostly at that time involved in the tennis industry. As a private tennis coach, I was traveling, playing some tournaments, both in Richmond, but also throughout the United States, did some travel abroad, traveled with a group of pro players as kind of their hitting partner and sparring partner, traveled and trained at some academies, but Richmond was my home base for a while before taking some time away, went up to Northern Virginia, DC area for a couple of years, did business school, and then back to Richmond. I've been here full time since for about, I guess, 2.5 years now, in summer of 22.
Great. And what was it that brought you back? I mean, like Richmond, was it a draw? I mean, did something say I need to come here? Was it a job? What happened?
I mean, there's a couple things, but one, I mean, I love Richmond as a city. When I was an undergrad, I spent a lot of my time on campus, but it was really kind of after I graduated I got to explore the city and kind of see what everything was about. And, I fell in love with the city. I moved around a lot growing up. So I've been in, some of the bigger cities like Chicago, and lived in some smaller areas as well. And Richmond was kind of a nice balance where you have a lot of kind of the bigger city amenities, but you have a really, kind of a nice pace of life. People here are really friendly, very welcoming, and you can find just a really good community without feeling like you're just another person in a crowd, right? So I really like that balance. And it's an affordable city. In DC, especially when I was kind of getting to a point where I wanted to buy a house, maybe look at starting a family. Richmond became more and more appealing. So I met my fiance here in Richmond. She went to University of Richmond as well, did law school. So we were kind of toying with the idea: do we want to stay in DC and try to do something there, or do we want to maybe come back to Richmond? And both of us have roots here in Richmond. It kind of felt like a second home. So as we started looking where we wanted to be, kind of what kind of city would allow us to live the lifestyle we wanted to. We're both fairly active, and Richmond kind of checked a lot of those boxes where we can, find a good house, we can be part of a community, and we can stay active, whether it's running, playing tennis, or just, enjoying things like getting out and spending some time on the James. So there were a lot of, pulls here that brought us back.
I was watching one of your pre-race videos, and I saw a clip of you running on Belle Isle, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a wonderful scenery to be able to train on. So
yeah, I love going down there. It's one of my favorite places. I lived, when I moved back to Richmond, I lived downtown. So I did a lot of my running, or probably overwhelming majority, on the Capitol Trail. But as much as I could, you just go the other way, and it's amazing. With a half a mile, you're downtown Richmond, right? But you are now on soft trails. You kind of have this this serene backdrop. I'm running along the river, I'm waking up, before work, and I see deer and wildlife, and it's just completely, it's so nice to be able to completely check out and have that just, that nice environment, even though you're in the middle of the city.
So you are a driven individual, and both in your academic performance and your career, and obviously in your fitness and training and performance out on the race track. So tell me a little bit about your profession, your career up until this point, and what did you learn from that? What was that sort of drive, the demanding drive? We'll just tell folks that you were in the investment banking world. So
Mm-hmm.
so anybody who doesn't know, maybe you can explain how rigorous that is. But what did you learn from that, and how do you see those lessons playing out as you move into the future? I know you're helping some folks. You mentioned helping folks as a sparring partner, helping
Mm-hmm.
coach runners. Tell us a little bit about what you're working on and how you kind of see the future.
Yeah, I think for better or worse, I have maybe a bit more of a type A personality where I've always been really driven. I think this goes back to as early as I can remember growing up, playing sports. My first sport was baseball, and my goal was to try to be the best player I wanted to be. I had early dreams of, playing in the major leagues. But, I never really had the same passion I did for maybe baseball as I did some other sports, and ended up just picking up tennis because that was what a lot of my friends were doing. I picked up a racket as a junior in high school and realized I was a fairly good athlete and good enough to at least be competitive and make the tennis team. So did that really just kind of more recreationally, and then didn't lose a match in high school. So had a pretty good high school career for those 2 years. Really enjoyed it. And then going to college, but that was kind of back on mine. I thought that was it. I played club tennis in college. And then it really wasn't until after I graduated. And the goal at that point was thinking law school or some kind of graduate school. So I finished and started studying for the LSAT. And a good friend of mine was traveling and starting to play in the professional tour. He was a top 10 player in the country, and he needed a hitting partner, someone to kind of help organize his schedule. And so he could really just focus on the training aspect of his game. So I was good enough to at least be a practice partner with him. And, I would actually kind of supplement the time between training with him, doing some private coaching. So I started working with some local players in Richmond, some juniors, as they were trying to make their high school team, or if they had goals of playing collegiately. So, I was learning a lot with tennis, but I was surrounded by players who were, top in the country or internationally ranked players. So whether it was, again, just tournaments in and around the Mid-Atlantic area, then it became we were traveling a little further throughout the United States. And then we were traveling internationally. I spent time in Western Europe, Africa, kind of all over North and South America, mostly as a hitting partner for these players, but also if there was a spot in qualifying, I would jump in and play some of these tournaments as well. I'd be lucky if I held serve a couple of times, but it was a really fun experience. And like I said, I learned so much about not just the competition, but also how these athletes were training, how they were taking care of their bodies, what they were eating. And there's so many other things that go into that elite level performance that I was never really exposed to. So that was my first real experience to see how these players trained and lived as professional athletes. And I was able to bring some of those things that that you could still incorporate into your daily life if you have a full-time job, if you're working, if you have a family. And I was able to bring those things into my own life and then also share those with some of my students. So you have, players, high school players able to take some of these, again, fairly, I think, I don't want to say easy, but, they were, it was a routine that you could adapt into their own training and started to see some really good success. So these players were doing very well. Some of them ended up with regional and national rankings playing collegiately. So that was a really fun time in my life. But, it was just, it's exciting for me to watch my own game improve, but also as helping these juniors reach their own level. And that's just, I don't know, it's just this internal drive that I've had of wanting to find what my personal best was while helping others, find their personal best. And, I was kind of, without thinking about entering into this world of tennis, but never really thought about that as a long-term career. But, 5 years went by and was still, fairly successful in the tennis industry, but wanted to try to do something else. I had this, college degree and was thinking grad school. So I started thinking more seriously about how that would take form. So was looking at different, grad school programs and ultimately just led on business school. Had the probably widest array of options, at that point thinking about, maybe consulting, maybe investment banking. And after, I was like, I'll go to business school, talk with some people and see kind of where my, strengths might align best. And I ended up, after business school, landing a job here in Richmond with Harris Williams doing M&A. And again, for anyone that doesn't know about kind of investment banking, but it's a, probably one of the most rigorous, I think, career paths where it's not atypical to work 80 to 100-hour work weeks. For example, my work day would probably start around 9:30 in the morning, and I would work until on an average day, probably 1 to 2 in the morning, with a small break for lunch and dinner. And I would get out the door for a run at some point in the evening whenever my time would allow. And then, weekends would be, you're working. It just depends on kind of where you are in the deal life cycle, but usually it's, putting in, 4 to 6 hours on a Saturday, and then Sunday would be a full day. So, you're working 7 days a week. Sometimes you have a little more flexibility, and then there are others where, it's heads down and you're working hard. But, you know, I've always been a hard worker, and the environment was challenging, but I was also surrounded by some of the brightest and most ambitious people that I've ever been around. I can't really say enough good things about that firm and the people that I met there. And, it's interesting because I think about tennis, and I knew how to work really hard for something I wanted. Right now, I was working for something that sometimes was really hard and things that were interesting, and sometimes things had to get done. So I learned to work hard in a different set of environment and with a different set of circumstances that I never really experienced. And I was able to kind of take that kind of that perspective into training for something I wanted, and I was able to work even harder, right? So I knew if I could succeed in investment banking, that running, honestly, like I could definitely do that, because that was something I was really, it's kind of a growing interest and became, now is probably my biggest passion.
I feel like running is kind of one of these things that, at least in my experience, that when you do it, they always talk about the wall, but when you get on the other side of the wall, it feels like you have this it's amazing power, just to do whatever your mind can say that you can do. Do you have that similar experience, and has that been something that you've been able to convert to other parts of your life?
Yeah, running is almost meditative for me. When I started, this was my outlet from working, and it was a really high stress environment where we're working a lot. And that was my time where I would really just kind of get out and be able to turn it off, and really just kind of get in touch with my, really just sometimes just checking out, but also just kind of feel how my body felt, right? And like you kind of were mentioning, feeling that strength, and you start. And when I first started running, it was tough. I remember going out from one of my first long runs, trying to run 5, 6, 7 miles, and really struggling. I could barely get it done, and it wasn't comfortable. So it was a process and definitely took time. But I realized, a couple weeks would go by, and I was able to run a little easier. I was able to run the same distance with less effort. And I got to a point, and I'm not sure even when it was, but I would just be able to go out the door, and my heart rate would stay nice and low, and I would really relax and enjoy the entire run. And I was putting the same effort in, but my times were getting faster, and I felt, really, really good afterwards. So, it definitely was something that, I was noticing performance improving, but also it was just a really enjoyable experience.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. I want to talk more about running and the Richmond Marathon when we come back. You're listening to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1. I am your host, Will Melton. Today in the studio, we have Rob Mazzanti. He is the first place finisher in the Richmond Marathon. And I'm super excited to have this conversation because we all need inspiration to get up and go. And we all can use examples like Rob to better see what's possible out there. So your story is one of performance, I would say, just based on what you've described to me. You said in your social post yesterday, kind of your report out from the run, that leading up to the race and during the race, you focused on really three things: flow, fight, and finish. Tell me about what those three things mean to you. Were those things that you were harnessing the entire race, or were those things that you kind of had to pull out at different times to be able to motivate yourself? What does flow, fight, and finish look like for you inside your head as you're running 26.1 miles?
Yeah, so the flow, fight, and finish was my kind of three-pronged strategy going into the Richmond Marathon. I had a lot of time leading up into the weeks and the days leading into the race of kind of how I wanted to approach, and how I wanted to actually run the course. And my fitness was good. I had a really strong training block going into it. But Richmond's a fairly challenging course. There's some elevation on the course. Weather was pretty good, so that wasn't as much of an issue. But there was also some wind, and I wanted to factor all these different things, and then also consider my own personal strengths to be able to, try to reach the best time that I could. So I broke the course down into 3 sections, miles, basically from the start to about miles 9.5, and that was the flow state. The second part of the race, the next 9 miles or so up until from mile 9.5 to 18, is kind of the most challenging part of the Richmond marathon course, and that was the fight course. That's where I knew I'd have to really dial in mentally, work through some of the hills and some of the challenging parts of the race, and that's when things would start to get difficult. And then the end, from miles 18 to the finish, you get more of kind of rolling elevation. But at that point, you're really trying to, manage the fatigue that you have in your body. But the course was going to be a little bit more forgiving at that point, and my goal was to finish really strong, lean on my training, and really just have the confidence to be able to push through and through the finish.
So for those listening, just to kind of give them an image of you on the course, I actually saw you on the course. I was picking up a donut from Sugar Shack and walking my dogs. But I saw you run by, and for a moment I was like, oh, this guy just walked out of his house and entered the course and started running, because there was literally nobody around you. I couldn't see anybody behind you, and your lead was so much that I wouldn't have been. I could look all the way down Lombardy Street, and I wouldn't have seen anybody at you. So I thought that was such a cool thing to see you out front like that, and you finished incredibly strong. I think that you didn't do the race record, but you finished way ahead of everybody else in this race, and did you beat your best time?
Yeah, so this is my personal record by a pretty substantial amount. Last year I ran Richmond and finished in just under 2:30, which was my A goal at the time. So it was 2:29 high, and then this year was 2:25 in 12 seconds. So, especially in marathoning terms, almost 5 minutes is a fairly substantial amount of time to take off your previous record. So yeah, it was really successful race, and I think it was about 4 minutes or 4.5 minutes ahead of the second place finisher.
Did you hit your goal?
Yeah, so leading into it, I had 3 goals. My first goal was to podium, but in the back of my mind was to really win the race. That was my A goal. My B goal was sub 2:25, which was a time goal, which missed out by 12 seconds. And then the C goal was to hit a PR. And I put my A goal as to win the race ahead of the time, because Richmond, if I wanted to run a fast course, I would, there are other courses that are more conducive to that. You go run Chicago, for example, a couple weeks ago. It's a flat course, and you don't have to really worry about, the strategy so much, as opposed to just going out and just locking into a pace and running fast the entire time. Richmond, you have to be much more strategic about when you're going to put effort in to manage the hills, uphill, downhill, so that you're able to finish strong. So my goal also is, I was thinking about, as I was putting together my race schedule, of what race I wanted to go. And I originally had one actually marked for my fall calendar in New York, the Wineglass Marathon. But fitness was starting to improve, and I started to get really excited about there's the potential that I could win my hometown race in Richmond. I was like, I made my marathon debut in Richmond a couple years ago, and I've had this great journey and been surrounded by this community in Richmond. And I was like, it would be a dream come true for me to be able to win my hometown race. So I switched over and I signed up for Richmond, and as soon as I did that, I knew I wanted to fight for a podium spot. And then as my fitness improved, it became a more realistic goal that I might have a shot at winning and bringing the crown back to Richmond.
So are you watching your time as you're running?
Yes and no. So I have a pretty wide range. So with that 3-pronged strategy we talked about, with the flow, fight, and finish, I also had kind of prescribed pace ranges for each one. So for every 2 or 3 mile segment, let's say if it was going downhill into tailwind, but then I knew I had a big hill to approach, the next mile, I might stay between, let's say, a 5:20 pace per mile and a 5:40. So I would stay within kind of a 20 or 30-second range, kind of whatever felt good at that moment. If I'm going uphill, that might change from, let's say, a 5-minute and 30 pace to a 6-minute. If I'm going downhill, I'd have a 30-second range that might be a minute below that. So I had an idea, but I give my body plenty of leeway, because there are times in the course where you're going to feel a little better, and other times they're challenging, and you don't want to fight that. I could maybe run a little faster at points, and maybe in that moment I might run faster, but the marathon's a long time to be on the course. You're out there for several hours, and if you push a little too hard, or you push at the wrong time, that's when you'll catch up. It'll catch up with you at mile 20, 22, or 24.
Something that's remarkable about this that listeners might not know is you suffered an injury leading up to this, or a minor injury, I believe. So you were in recovery mode leading up to the race. Tell me a little bit about that. You also, one of the things that I found interesting is that you talked about running and working out, and I found out that working out is running as well. So tell us a little bit about the difference between just going for a run and working out, and what was that Were you worried about your injury inhibiting your ability to podium at this race?
Yes. So, and I think maybe part of it is self-induced. I mean, one, my training volume is quite high. So I run anywhere between 100 and 120 miles per week. And then I usually do that for 3 to 4 weeks and then have a down week to kind of let my body adapt, kind of, you know, hopefully kind of build on that fitness, right? And then also if there are any small injuries or things that are just sore, let my muscles kind of recover a little bit. But in the final weeks, really the last month leading up into Richmond, I had two kind of practice races. I ran the Emerald Isle Marathon in Emerald Isle, North Carolina, as kind of my last long run. That was a month out, which I won first place in, and that was my first time winning a marathon. And then the next weekend, I ran the Raleigh City of Oaks Half Marathon, which I also came in first place. That one I ran faster, and that was a really hilly course. So I was running anywhere between 5 minutes and 5 minutes 20 per second mile, and and I think running at that pace up and down some pretty severe elevation, I think just put a lot of strain on my left Achilles and calf, and sometimes it's kind of hard to know when there's pain and when it's maybe an injury. And after a couple of days of lingering, I started to worry that it might be something more serious. So I had a couple workouts planned, which is, or more just kind of speed sessions where I head out to the track and I'm running kind of what I think a lot of people think about when they're running. Your hands are on your knees, you're trying to catch your breath, and working really hard with, periods of working hard than rest. A lot of my running though is, I'd say 80% of my running is I go out the door, I don't really check my watch, and I run at a pace that feels comfortable, kind of whatever it is. And I'm not worried if it's some days it's maybe it's an 8 or 9 minute mile, other days it's much faster. But I kind of just try to enjoy the run as much as I can. And then usually 2 to 3 times a week, I'll go out and do some faster sessions or a long run. But yeah, so it was managing, I think kind of the recovery from those races. And I had a 2 week window where I had to try to get my body healthy. And that's really where all my focus kind of shifted to in the last couple weeks leading up to the race to Richmond was how do I get healthy? How do I really take care of my body so I'm able to really leverage all this fitness and all the hard work I did so I can perform in Richmond. And really, days leading up to it, each day was getting a little better and a little better. And then, race morning when I was warming up, there was a little bit of tightness. I did a 2 mile warm up before the race. And then I started doing some faster, just some kind of jogging, but throwing in some faster surges to see how it felt. And it felt good. So at that point, it was, check mark, all systems go.
I struggle with the idea that anybody would run 2 miles ahead of running. I said 26.1, 26.2 miles. I'm not even going to let you respond to that because I think that's just crazy. So Richmond's marathon is billed as America's friendliest marathon. Tell me a little bit about the crowd interaction that you experience when you're out on the course, and does that help you? What's it feel like to interact with all those folks?
It's incredible. I mean, Sports Packers does an amazing job hosting this race. This is actually my 8th marathon in 2 years. So I started my first one in fall for this Richmond in 2022. It was my first experience, and it was incredible. And I think about that was I really didn't know what to expect, and even then it was a really welcoming kind of experience. And I think if you're running for the first time, or really even if you've ran marathons before, races before, it's still a really intimidating process. You're showing up and you have all these other runners around, and you have kind of maybe your own personal expectations. So it's intimidating. And then just the course itself, you're running 26 miles. You're going out there really pushing your physical and mental limits on that day. But Richmond does a really good job of making it inclusive, regardless of whether you're really gunning for a personal best and you're trying to run as fast as you can, or you're just trying to see what your body's capable of doing. I think there are a lot of resources to make you feel comfortable, to help you kind of know what to expect as much as you can. And then the crowd support, like you mentioned, it really is incredible, especially, even more so for me from Richmond. I was running through the race and I remember just hearing my name several times and seeing familiar faces. And then also people that I've never met before. They're cheering for me like they've known me my entire life and had, and were so invested in it as well. And, I'm running and, there's this intrinsic motivation, but then you're running and you see all these crowds cheering, and I'm so appreciative of all the time they're taking, right? It's 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday, and they're out there cheering for me, and it gives me so much motivation. And you find this extra win, this extra gear when you're running by to keep pushing, and especially late in the race, it's incredible. It's invaluable. I remember, and maybe it was mile 23 or 24. It was getting towards the end, and I really had to start working hard to push. And it's when the half marathon and the marathon converge, right at that point, and you have all these runners that are running the half, and they're cheering me on as I'm going. I had people clapping, cheering, and watching, and and then I remember vividly hearing someone telling me to drive with my legs, my form, my knees were starting to get a little bit lower. I was having to work a little harder, and it was amazing. It just helped me remind me to kind of bring me back into that moment to push hard. But it's amazing. You have runners. I remember the first time I was running actually Richmond, I passed somebody in the race, and someone said good job. And I think from my athletic background, I played baseball, I played tennis. No one was cheering for you. Your opponent certainly isn't actually encouraging you, as you are winning or essentially beating them, right? And but that's the kind of race Richmond is. You have fans that are there cheering for you. You have other runners there, and everyone's out there to really see, and reach their own personal best. And that environment is really incredible, and really just something that's hard to find.
Well, incredible inspiration. Big congrats on every aspect of the win and your performance. We're going to take another quick break, and then when we come back, I want to shift focus a little bit toward just the Richmond community and our collective health. You're listening to America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1, part of the Mike King Biz Media Network. I'm your host, Will Melton, and if you are tuning in for the first time, please hop over to our socials. Catch us at America's Healthiest City on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can see shorts from our episodes, and you can catch full episodes on YouTube as well as wherever you get your podcasts. So please go over there, podcast.americashealthiestcity.com, to catch those episodes and subscribe. We are at Common House today recording this episode on a tight schedule. We have Rob Mazzanti, who is the first place finisher in the Richmond Marathon, Allianz Partners Richmond Marathon. And this is, again, just really inspirational. And I wanted to, this next segment, I want to talk a little bit about, before we move into Richmond, I want to talk about what's next for you. Do you have another race picked out?
I do. So I'm racing in about 2.5 weeks. I'm running an ultra marathon, which is a big category that's basically anything longer than an actual marathon. So it's a 50K. It's about 32 miles trail race in Virginia, out west a little bit in Farmville. So I'll be running that with the goal of trying to hopefully set a new course record.
Is this your first ultra?
It's the second. So okay. I did one in the fall of 2022 in Virginia Beach, the Seashore 50K, which I also ended up winning in first place.
Wonderful. What? You're just a winner, man. You're just a winner. With that in mind, I want to help Richmond believe that it can be a winner, that we can all be winners. What advice do you have for people who are maybe thinking about running a marathon, or maybe just have some kind of dream about what their future looks like? What advice would you give people about pursuing those dreams, taking up the fight, and pushing to achieve their goals?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question. And I think something like the marathon or any big goal, they're big for a reason. They're intimidating, right? And I think that can be what I think prevents a lot of people from, putting their shoes on, lacing them up for the first time, or whether it's going back to graduate school, and shifting, maybe changing careers. I mean, these things, they take a lot of sacrifice. They're hard. And I think a lot of people, they look at these and they think about everything that's required to be able to ultimately get to where they want to go. And I think if you can break that down into smaller subsets, into smaller goals, make it more achievable. If I started running and I said, I'm going to go win the Richmond Marathon, I don't know that I would have ever started. My goal when I first started training, I think just 2.5 years ago for running, endurance running, was to finish a marathon. So I signed up with Richmond, and my goal was just to see if I could make it to the finish line without walking. I just wanted to be able to keep going, keep moving. And so I started kind of training with that mindset in mind, right? Where I was just going out the door, running, and trying to build distance and not put unnecessary pressure on myself. I wanted to, again, perform well, but I wasn't trying to hit certain times, because I would, at that point, essentially set myself up for failure. But instead it was, how do I get better, a little bit better each day, each week? What are some things I can do, and enjoy the process while it's happening, right? So, I didn't want to put all these unrealistic expectations or just do so many workouts where I just felt like it was really hard work and not enjoying it. So, I was, I think I had a little bit longer term view where I was like, it's okay if if I go out for a workout and it doesn't, I don't hit the times I want, or it's not, maybe successful on paper, but I went out there, I worked hard, and that's a success. And I think so, if you are, whether it's running a marathon, right? I think it's just getting out there and just going for a run. And if you're running, it's your first time, get out there once or twice a week. If it means you have to walk a little bit and you're walking and running, that's okay. Because that's good. The time running is going to increase a little bit each week. And then a month or two will go by, and next thing you know, you'll be running 2 or 3 miles, or that might turn into 3 or 4. So it's amazing what just consistency can do in your life. And again, whether that is, and that is applicable to all parts of your life. And I think if you are running a marathon, just give yourself enough time and allow yourself some forgiveness. But if you just keep building on it, you'll be amazed what your body is able to do. And you can achieve great things just by continuing to show up and putting in consistent work throughout that period.
So it sounds like accountability to showing up is probably the key there, but also not beating yourself up, not really saying that if I don't hit these specific goals every time, that because that sets yourself up for disappointment when you hit those, when you don't hit those. And I love it. I think this idea that we can have fun while doing hard things is something I very much believe in, and I hope that others can recognize that when we separate ourselves from the comfort zone, we find a lot of rewards in that. So I want to do one other thing before we wrap up here. A couple things, actually. We ask everybody on the show who inspires them in this community, who's somebody who we might think to interview on a future episode. And maybe you have that prepared, maybe you don't. So if not, and you want some time to think about that, one thing I also want you to help folks with is how can they follow your run journey? I know that you've run 200 miles already just in November. Where can they see that?
Sure. So, I try to be as transparent as I can. I started a YouTube channel, which you can find. It's Rob Mazzanti, where I document kind of what I'm doing on a weekly basis, the kind of running that I'm doing, and showing my workouts, whether they're good, the bad, the ugly, and kind of everything kind of surrounding that. So if you're interested in running, and I'll also try to make that where it also can be something, maybe some ideas that you can apply into your own training. So you can find me on YouTube, which is a newer project that I've started. Also on Strava, where you can see all my runs. And that's less of me talking, but just actually just kind of see what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. Also on Instagram, where I'll try to put in some additional information there. So it's just Rob Mazzanti across the platforms.
Great. And do you have a recommendation for a future guest? If not, it's okay.
No, I do. And, I think this also kind of ties back into maybe even, if you're planning to run a marathon or doing something, what can help you. And that is, the running community in Richmond is actually really strong. Whether you're first starting out as a beginner or you're really advanced. There are, a lot of running groups and just communities in the city here that, they kind of help with that accountability, right? Where you show up, it's a lot more fun to run with other people. You start running, you're having conversations, you're meeting really just great people. And one of the great things about the running community is it brings people together from, different areas that probably would never intersect otherwise. Yeah. It's just incredible. And you end up forming some just amazing friendships and bonds through these groups. And, I run with, again, not as much as I like, but hopefully now with a little bit more flexibility on my schedule, a little bit more, but I run with the Rogue Runners in Richmond. They're a little more of an advanced group. Then also a newer running group in Richmond, which has just exploded. It's the Effect running group. One of the founders is Clay. He's a newer runner and just put up some phenomenal times as well. And I think he's done so much for the running community. He's just, his passion for running and health and fitness is just evident. I mean, he's just so much great energy and has done a great job building this community. I think really kind of breaking down that barrier. I think a lot of people may be intimidated going and running and saying, hey, look, there's no expectations here. Come out, run, have a good time, and let's really enjoy this. And, performance can kind of almost be secondary, but let's enjoy running and kind of everything it can do for your health and your body.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll have you connect me with Clay so that we can bring him on. We'll have a slightly different format as we get into 2025, so it'll make good room for that. Mm-hmm. So you are, just before we wrap up here, you are available for hire. If somebody's looking for a running coach, mm-hmm. They need to reach out to you. It sounds
Yeah, so actually, I just started running coaching. So I was doing a lot of tennis coaching. So I have a pretty extensive background working with kind of athletes of all levels. But I'm working with a good friend now who's very good athlete and on the precipice of breaking the 3 hour mark, which is I think for most a lifetime goal, hitting a Boston qualifying time. So we're working together and expecting him to do great things. So yeah, that's kind of the next evolution. I've learned a lot in running in my own journey over the last couple of years, and I'm just really passionate about running, health, and fitness. And if someone is interested, would love to be able to help someone along their own journey in helping them hit their own personal goals.
Well, Rob Mazzanti, thank you for joining us in the studio today, and thank you, congratulations, not thank you. Thank you for the inspiration, but congratulations for your many wins. I'm really inspired, and we have so much to learn from you, so thank you.
Thanks, Will. Really appreciate it.
This was America's Healthiest City on ESPN Richmond 106.1. You can catch us on the network every Thursday at 6 a.m. We will catch you next time.